Hi, everyone. Welcome to LMU Speaks. My name is Rhonda Rosen, and I'm the Programming and Exhibitions Librarian here at the William H. Hannon Library. Welcome to our very special annual program, LMU Speaks. Before I turn the program over to our host for the evening, we have a few housekeeping items. The first thing is I just want you to know that this event is being recorded and it will be on the library's YouTube channel very soon. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the chat function. We will be opening the chat function to all attendees. We want this to be an uplifting and positive event. It is a professional event, and therefore we will not tolerate any disrespectful comments in this session. We reserve the right to remove anyone from tonight's session if we observe anything that does not honor our storytellers and fellow attendees. The next thing we want to do is our land acknowledgement. So this event has been organized in part through the Loyola Marymount University and William H. Hannon Library. And so we use this location to base our land acknowledgement. The land that the William H. Hannon Library sits on is seized territory of the Tongva peoples, the traditional land caretakers of Tavangar. And we want to start by recognizing their history and calling attention to their presence. We encourage you to learn more about the history of the land where you sit by going to nativeland.ca. And if you're on the Tavangar in particular, we are pasting 2 additional URLs into the chat box for you to explore as you wish. So now I get the great honor to introduce Lynn Mitchell-Parrish, who will be our host for tonight's evening performances. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Hello, everyone, and welcome to one of my very favorite events on campus, or virtually, as the case may be, the William H. Hannon Library's LMU Speaks. This is Mambo number 5. We're coming at you 5 years in a row with storytelling. We're very excited to be here. I'm your MC for the evening, and I have had the pleasure of being with LMU Speaks since the very beginning. Perhaps some of you watching have also been with us over the years, or maybe this is your first time. Regardless, we are grateful that all of you are pushing through the Zoom fatigue to be here this evening, but you will not regret it. I mean, there are just not enough superlatives to describe what you're about to experience. The library is in its 5th year of bringing you the stories that you could not hear anywhere else. In honor of this year's milestone, I'm happy to tell you that we have 5 speakers tonight, which I believe is a record for LMU Speaks, so that's great. Each year, we give the speakers a common theme determined by some of the greatest minds on campus. 2020, provided us with a few topic choices, so we decided not to get too heavily specific. We tend to keep it light and keep the prompt really open so that the individual speakers can bring whatever's important to them and make sure that they can make this their own. So we had a few light, I always like to talk about how we got to the theme. We had a few light runners up. One was LMU Speaks, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Another close runner up, and one of my favorites, LMU Speaks, pants optional. You know who you are, and you know the stories. So we decided to go, a little bit deeper, something that allowed us to get a chance to know the people behind the masks, both literally and figuratively, of course. So it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 5th annual LMU Speaks, If Only You Knew. Our first speaker tonight is an undergraduate student here at LMU. Please welcome Tegan So.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tegan So, and I am a sophomore majoring in screenwriting and psychology and minoring in Asian Pacific Studies. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe in this pandemic. For me, I've personally found a lot of time to stare at my very blank walls and have an existential crisis. Yay, so much fun. And I think, especially now, one of the big questions I've been asking myself, as all college students do, is what am I doing with my life? And if only you knew what existential crises were like for me, they are kind of very intense experiences. There's a lot of introspection, a lot of soul searching, a lot of Googling internet forums and looking up what is wrong with me and how do I fix it? But I think in order to fully take you on my journey with this question, I have to take you back to the beginning. And so my earliest childhood memory is going to Kumon. And if you guys don't know, Kumon is an after school program, and they have centers all over the world where parents will send their children to complete worksheets and tests in order to help them develop their reading and math skills. And I remember as a child, my grandma would pull me and my little sister in our little blue wagon to the Kumon Center in Manila, Philippines, where I was born. And I definitely recognize that it was a privilege for me to be able to do something like that. And I ended up going to Kumon from when I was 3 years old to when I was 13 years old. So 10 years, and that's about half of my lifetime. Even when we moved from the Philippines to Northern California to Southern California, I still went to Kumon. And for a long time, it ended up being one of the big constants in my life. And I think it was because of that, that from an early age and for most of my childhood, I associated my success with quantitative measures of intelligence. And once I got to high school, this meant my grades. And if only you guys knew what it was like in my high school, oh my goodness gracious. My high school had a very toxic and competitive atmosphere, so much so that it felt like if you didn't get an A in your classes, your life might as well be over. You would never go to college, you'd never get a job, and you'd probably be sad and lonely for the rest of your life. And because I was living and a part of such an atmosphere, I would constantly throw myself into my studies. And it was because of this that I formed very unrealistic expectations of success. I also developed a lot of very bad habits while I was pushing myself to chase these kinds of things. This was the start of my very unhealthy sleep schedule and also my drive for perfectionism and especially for acknowledgement and recognition from others. And these are all things that still kind of haunt me today and that I'm still working on fixing. But I think it was really back then that they started to appear and like become very strong presences in my life. However, it wasn't until my senior year of high school that my views of success changed very drastically. And I think that happened because of two really big events for me. Um, the first was that my grandpa passed away in the Philippines. And at that time, my parents didn't really tell me or my sister too much information about how sick he was or how he was doing because they didn't want us to be distracted from our schoolwork and they didn't want our grades to drop. And then after my grandpa passed away, my family also didn't want my sister and I to go to his funeral because at that time, our school wasn't on a school break or a vacation. So if we were to fly back to the Philippines to attend his funeral, that would mean missing school, missing class, missing assignments, and then our grades would drop. And this led me to a lot of realizations while I was grieving. But one of them was like, fuck grades, fuck school. There's so many more things that are important in life than just letters and numbers. Like there were so many things that I was missing out on that were way more important to me, like my grandpa or like my family, because of this priority with success. And I really appreciated that my family wanted us to be successful. But for me, this interpretation was just not right. And I think the second major event that really changed my view of success was that I decided that I wanted to be a storyteller. And I remember when I told my family, they were very shocked. They were like, "You mean you don't want to be a lawyer, doctor, engineer? What? That's crazy." But when I decided to pursue my passion for writing and the arts, I also realized that because I wasn't going down a traditional path of success, I really needed to reevaluate what that success meant to me. And this question followed me to college. And just to preface what I'm going to go into next, I just want to say that I love my parents to death. They are amazing, they're incredible, they're wonderful. They've always been very supportive of me and encouraging and just want the best for me. And they weren't initially sure about my career choices, but they finally agreed to like support me in my decision, and they just wanted me to like do my best. And because of that, I really wanted to pay that back and just to make my parents proud. So coming into college, my main goal was just to make my parents proud. But once again, I realized that my interpretation of success and my parents' interpretation of success didn't necessarily match. And I think the best way to explain this realization is to tell you about how I came out to my parents. Oh my goodness gracious. If only you knew how I came out to my dad. And so I remember this very, very clearly. It was the middle of my first semester at LMU. I was visiting home for the first time since coming here, and I remember my dad had come all the way to my dorm to pick me up. And as we were driving home, I was telling him about my semester, the classes I was taking, the friends I was making, and all of my new experiences. And finally, I decided that, you know what? I want to come out to my dad. I want to share this part of me with him, and I don't want to hide it anymore. And so I'm going to tell him. And I had had some mixed reactions to my coming out before, so I wasn't sure how he was going to take it. I was really nervous. I was kind of shaking, lots of like nervous butterflies. But finally, I was like, hey, dad, I identify as pansexual and I have a girlfriend. And my dad doesn't miss a beat, doesn't take his eyes off the road. He just says, that's great, honey, as long as you keep your grades up. Remember, relationships are just extracurriculars, so if your grades go down, you have to drop your relationship too. Grades come first. And at that time, I was just like, yeah, for sure, totally. But in my head, I was also like, what just happened? What is that supposed to mean? What? So yeah, that was another moment of realization that maybe my definition of success wasn't necessarily the same as my parents'. Which brings me back to my original existential crisis question. What am I doing with my life? And I think the very clear answer is that I want to be successful, but I have a very complicated relationship with success, even without considering my personal experiences with it. So, with all of the time that I have in quarantine, I've just been asking myself, what does success mean to me? Is it quantitative? Definitely not. If there's anything I've learned, it's that I really don't like quantitative measures of success. I've also learned that I think success is very personal. What I think is successful doesn't always line up with what other people think. And because of that, maybe success is something I figure out for myself and not necessarily what other people see me as. Currently, I've come to the conclusion that success is becoming someone that I can be proud of and being content with where I am. I'm still working on unlearning my perfectionism and all of the other unhealthy habits I picked up along the way. And if only I knew back then when I was starting to think about this, that maybe success really could be this simple. I know that even though as an idea it sounds simple, it's been very hard to like achieve and put into practicality. But I think if I can achieve that someday, then that sounds like a pretty A+ life to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tegan. I think that all of us are trying to figure out what the actual metrics for success are, because they just seem to keep changing all the time. And I often feel like I'm a fish being asked to climb a tree. So thank you for sharing and you're in a great community here, not because we have the answers, but because we could all figure this out together. So feel free to reach out. So thank you very much, Tegan. Our next speaker is another undergraduate student. Please welcome Michaela Gengry Osborne.
Hello, everyone. I would say it's really great to see all of your faces, but I cannot. But it is still great to be here with you all today. My name is Michaela Gengry, and I'm a senior screenwriting major with a double minor in history and political science. Now, if you know me on campus, you probably know me as the former president of Bells, or maybe you know me as a resident advisor, maybe you know me as a CLC leader, or maybe you just know me that girl that's rushing by on her penny board. But if you really knew me, you would have to know the 12-year-old Michaela. Now, the 12-year-old Michaela is very similar to the Michaela you see here today, very joyful, very happy, mixing it up on the basketball court, the soccer field. I was also very much into football out there playing with the guys. Um, but then something really weird started to happen. It was almost as if I started tripping on air, and everyone was like, oh, she's 12, she's going through a growth spurt. I was very much a string bean, so she's just getting used to her body. But then it continued to happen. And my mom and like the preschool officers were like, I don't know, Maria, that's my mom's name, who's also in the audience today. You're like, Maria, maybe you should like get her checked out. That would be really important. And so they're like, okay. So I ended up going to the doctor and I went into this large MRI machine. And I don't know if any of you all had been through that, but it's a bit of a scary process, especially as a 12-year-old. And you hear all this loud clanging around you and you're just like, what is happening? But it was also okay because I had the Jonas Brothers in the background. Kevin, Joe, and Nick definitely got me through that with burning up. So I was able to enjoy the experience. But after I came out of that big tube, I saw my mom looking between myself and the screen. And I was like, oh no, something is wrong. So essentially, I had a cyst that was surrounding my spinal column. And what was happening was when I was telling my brain, and when my brain was telling my legs to walk, it was being sent, but then the message was getting just a second late, which led to me tripping. Which is obviously very scary. And it was going to be a very major surgery, but I'm very blessed and privileged to have healthcare. I was also very blessed and privileged to be in the Pacific Northwest, where they had one of the best pediatric surgeons. So I went in feeling confident with my family, with my community standing behind me. After the 5-hour surgery, I woke up and I looked at my mom and I looked at my dad and they were like, how are you feeling? And I was like, I'm feeling pretty good. So I'm just talking it up and the nurse comes in. They're like, we're just gonna like run a couple tests to make sure everything is going well. And I was like, yeah, no problem. I'm just talking. And then the nurse goes, could you just move your foot for me? And I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. And then she goes, could you move your foot for me? And I was like, lady, what is wrong with you? Yes, I'm moving my foot. And then she had this very scared look on her face and she rushed out of the room and returned with the doctor. And this was the first time that I actually saw an emotion on his face, and it was absolute fear. So apparently something had gone wrong in the surgery, and he informed me and my family that I was going to be paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of my life. How does anyone sit with that? Let alone a 12-year-old. It was very disheartening, but if we were in person in the Hannon Library and I would be walking up to the podium, you would know how the story ends. But hearing that diagnosis was not something that myself, my mom, and my dad were going to accept. So we worked very hard, and over the course over 3 months, I began to walk again. And yes, it's a happy ending, but it was not an easy journey. I remember sitting in the hospital for about 2 weeks, and then they got me strapped up to different contraptions and they had me attempting to walk laps around. And then after that, I was sent to another hospital where I was there for another 2 weeks to do inpatient therapy. And this is one of the first lessons that I took from that experience and where I really began to develop and grow. So I was with the physical therapist and my mom, and she was asking me to simply lift my knee just 2 inches off the ground. And I simply couldn't do it. I looked to my mom, and the physical therapist, borderline yelling, was like, Michaela. And I was like, huh? And she was like, the only person that can do this is you. Of course, I proceeded to start sobbing, but she was right. There was no one else in this moment that was going to help me. So, shutting my eyes tightly, I willed my body to move. And yes, I was able to lift my knee 2 inches off the mat. And in that moment, I discovered an internal drive that I didn't know was there before. I discovered grit, the ability to push past boundaries, the ability to defy the odds, the abilities to defy science, the people that say this is not possible, this will not happen. That is what I discovered in that moment. But the second thing I discovered was the importance of community. Something that my mother has always taught me is to lift others as you climb. Now, while I was beginning my journey to reteaching myself how to walk, I wasn't the only person in that workout room. I saw a lot of seniors in their 50s, 60s, 70s. Some of you might not consider 50s being seniors. um, but I was like, you know what? They need help and I need help. So I would roll over in my wheelchair and we would start creating competitions and games where we would push each other to work harder. And so even when we were at our lowest moments together, we were able to get stronger together. And the third thing that I learned from this experience is the element of joy. A lot of times we'll be faced with these circumstances where you're just asking why? Why me? But why me isn't going to get anyone very far. So you have to embrace your circumstances and find your joy. And I remember some of the best times I would invite my closest friends to the hospital where I was staying, and I would get them some wheelchairs too, and we would wheelchair race down the hallway, crashing into nurses. They thought we were very rambunctious, and we were, but it was a great time. And I remember the laughs and the smiles. I remember I was a bit devious with pranks. And so basically I have asthma. And so they would always ask me what I wanted to drink. And I was like, I'll take the blue Gatorade. And so the blue Gatorade was always tint my lips blue. And so they would rush in, they'd be like, oh my God, she's not breathing. And I was like, just kidding, I am. And I just say that to say that even at your lowest moments, there are moments of joy and moments where you can find just happiness and pure laughter. Of course, I don't want to sugarcoat it. It was difficult. And a lot of times you feel when you take 2 steps forward, there's always 1 step back. And so after I was released from the hospital, I was in community, but not in community as the same person. I was in community as someone with a physical disability. And so I'd be out around at the store with my wheelchair, and people would like rush to like open doors for me, and they'd be like, oh, this poor little girl, like they had so much pity for me. And I was like, if they only knew who I was 1 month ago, if they only knew that I was like laying up hoops all the time, but they only saw my weaknesses and they didn't see my strengths. And so in that moment I had to grapple with myself, and I realized that I had nothing to prove to the world, but I only had something to prove to myself. And even if I did struggle with the door because I had one hand on a wheel and one hand on the door, that was okay if I failed, because I'm a big believer in failing forward. And what matters is to try. And so, in conclusion, this is why I am joyful. At the beginning of the story, I talked about penny boarding on campus. That's why you see me zipping up and down around. That's why you see me on the dance floor, walking into class, because I know that that's something that could have been taken away or was taken away from me, and it could have been taken away from me for my entire life. And so I use every moment, every step with intentionality. And I just encourage you all on this call today to really have self-reflection and find what is that moment. Not everyone has the same experience as me, but everyone does have that moment, that one thing, if you only knew. And if you only knew how that can make our world so much smaller, smaller as in being connected, to just have the inside, vulnerable insight on who we are. So I encourage you all to find those stories and share those stories. So thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. I think the phrase that resonates the most with me is the concept of failing forward. I really, really like that. As something that not only I can take to heart, but I want to get my kids to take that to heart, to keep trying to overcome incredible obstacles. Thank you very much for being here and sharing your story. Okay, everyone, our next speaker is a Senior Associate Athletics Director here at LMU. Please welcome Mariah Baim.
Sorry, I had a Zoom problem right there. Sorry about that, but thank Thank you so much, Lynn. Really appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to our stories. And the name of my story is California Dreaming, If Only You Knew. My husband and I were East Coasters, and he was from Boston and I was from Buffalo. And he had this opportunity to take a limited term position in Los Angeles. This was way back in 1986. And it was going to be a 2-year position. Then we were going to move back to the East Coast. So in the summer of 86, we moved to Westchester, and our son was born about a few months later. However, 6 months after that, after moving to LA, he quit his job. And so that meant that we really weren't, didn't have to go back to the East Coast. So California dreaming right there. We were absolutely up for an adventure. Both of us had no family on the West Coast, but we really, thought we would want to try and make it work. So all good times. A couple years later, my second son was born, and life was filled with, play dates and mommy and me and new friends. And it was really, it was great. And then several years later, in June of 1991, our daughter was born. So we were a pretty busy family, and everyone was happy and healthy, and life was good. But in mid-July, about 6 weeks later, when my daughter, again, was just 6 weeks old, I asked my husband to go out to the store and get some baby Tylenol. And he was gone for a long time, longer than really should have been normal. But I thought, well, maybe he had run another errand or something, had happened. But I wasn't really worried. I wasn't kind of the worrying type. I thought he was, he would show up at some point. The baby was comfortable and I fell asleep, but I was awakened by the phone ringing. And on the other end of the line, this was a landline. This is way back before cell phones. At the other end of the line, it was the hospital, and telling me that my husband had been in an accident. And unfortunately, he had been assaulted, and he was, while he was waiting in the drive-through lane of a fast food restaurant. The assailants were behind him in the car, and something triggered their aggression. And my husband was the unfortunate victim. So his injuries were really concentrated around his head and his face. And when I got to the hospital, I had never seen anyone beat up before. I was pretty sheltered, and I had, let alone seen anyone that I loved look so bruised and swollen and unrecognizable. It was heartbreaking. But I knew that I had to be strong. And then when I got home, I had to prepare my kids for this horrible, change in their dad, especially my two boys. They were 2 and 4 years old, and certainly they had never seen anything like this before. So, but he came home the next day, and unfortunately, his condition deteriorated. He had headaches and dizziness and nausea. So he decided to go to see his own doctor and, have further evaluation from his own doctor. So he went to his doctor, and they performed a couple of scans on him and sent him home until they could read the scans. Of course, now you can do it immediately, but then, it took time to read them. So he came home. As soon as he got home, he was contacted by his doctor, and his doctor said that he needed immediate brain surgery to alleviate the pressure that was on his brain, and it was caused by internal bleeding that had been caused by the assault. So unfortunately, we had to rush back to the hospital, and he had to prepare for this craniotomy that he was about to undergo. And I was so incredibly proud of him as he was rolled into the operating room, how brave he was. And I was a wreck because I could just see him rolling into the operating room, but he was incredibly brave. So I was so proud of him. But he came out of surgery, and unfortunately, a new complication arose. While he was in the recovery room, he began having these grand mal seizures as his brain, was recovering from, again, still the assault. And if you've ever seen anyone have a grand mal seizure, it's really very, very disturbing. But he needed to stay in the hospital for a couple of weeks. I would visit him as often as I could and try to be that strong presence for him. Like I had everything under control, which of course was not the case. And the same thing with my children, again, they were 2 years, 4 years, and 6 or 7 weeks old. So I remember driving to the hospital by myself, and I would just be so sad and sobbing because I was so frightened for him and frightened for myself. And then when I would come home from the hospital, the same thing would happen. I was just a wreck, just really didn't know how I was going to handle all this. So, but my husband, he recovered from the surgery, and cognitively, he was really very close to where he had been, before the accident. His hair began to grow back, and, he had the great sense of humor, and, he took it all in stride. But unfortunately, the seizure disorder didn't go away. Medication helped, but the seizures, getting them under control was really challenging. It was hard to predict when they would occur. But when they happened, there was a complete lack of muscle control. And, if he fell, there was no way for him to know when he was going to fall. And he, had glasses. And if he fell, on his glasses, he would, give himself his own, black eyes, because he just could not control himself. So that was really frightening for him, certainly for him, and frightening for me. I don't think my children ever saw him have a seizure, but it was without a doubt, it was the most frightening thing I'd ever seen. I was frightened when he got in a car to drive. Would he sense an impending seizure? Would he be able to pull over safely? Would he be able to call someone if he needed help? There were no cell phones, and what would he do? Would he even be able to drive? It's such a disorienting disorder that, after you have one of these, it takes time. You're exhausted, and, the last thing you want to do is drive a car. So it was really stressful for him and for me. But, eventually, he managed to get through for a couple of years. And then in July of 1993, my daughter was 2 and my boys were 4 and 6. When it was, July of 93, and I was making breakfast, and my children, they were just waking up, and my husband was upstairs. And all of a sudden I heard this banging, or like furniture moving, or boxes falling. And I was kind of confused. I didn't know what was happening. So I ran upstairs to find my husband. He was unconscious on the bathroom floor, and he had just had a seizure. And usually when these seizures happened, he would eventually, kind of become a little more conscious. But he was completely unconscious at this point, and I couldn't revive him. So I called 911, and I went downstairs, and I told my children that their dad was sick and that the firemen were coming to help. And when they arrived, one of the firemen was actually the son of my next door neighbor. And, my children knew him. And so he went into their room, and he spent, the entire time that the paramedics were there, entertaining them, asking them questions, really just spending some great time. And I was, so grateful for that, because when my husband was brought down from upstairs. They, they had a stretcher and they had him on a stretcher to take him to the fire truck. My children didn't see that happen. I was so happy that they were distracted and weren't frightened by that vision of their dad. But so I went to the hospital immediately after that. And when I got there, they told me that my husband had died and that there was nothing more that could be done for him. So that was incredibly surreal. It was one minute, I was making breakfast. The next minute, my husband was suffering. And then the next minute, I was a single mom. It was incredibly, it was a situation that the doctor said people typically didn't die from seizures, so it was one of these things that we never expected that to happen. And later that morning, I had to have, this heartbreaking talk, with my children, telling them that their dad had died and he wasn't coming home. So that was incredibly difficult. I was sad, I was angry, I was in denial, and finally, eventually, I had to accept this fact that I had lost my husband. But I knew I couldn't give up. I knew I had to be strong. I knew I had to move forward. I believed really that my husband had been in pain, after his accident, and that the pain had continued, during his seizures. And that really, when he died, I felt that the pain that he had lived with was gone. And that, really, in order to try to understand it, I had to have faith that this had happened for a reason. And the reason is that he was no longer in pain. And, my being a single mom and my children being without their dad, that was incredibly difficult, but, that our pain was not as much as the pain that he was going through. So that's really what I had to have faith was the reason for that. So, I guess I could have moved back to Buffalo. That would have been the easiest thing to do, but I really wanted the time to, go through our new reality and not try to act too quickly. I wanted to maintain as much stability as I could for my kids, and for me, so that we weren't, uprooting everything and changing 100% of everything that we knew was normal. So I gave myself a year to kind of comfort my children, to give them ways to express their grief, and to grieve myself. This will get kind of emotional here, but they would draw pictures of how they were feeling, and they would take them, we would take them to their dad's grave, and they would talk about and share about what was going on in their life, or we would take the pictures to like the fireplace, and we'd light them on fire, and we would talk about the feelings that they had, and as the smoke was going up the fireplace, that their feelings and their words in love were going up to their dad. So that was pretty incredible. The other thing that happened once when we went to the cemetery was my middle son just unprompted made up his own song and sang it to his dad when he was about 5 years old. So that was incredible. It was really an amazing emotional moments. I'll really never forget that, listening to that. But you know how life is, you have to push forward. So I knew that if I wanted to try and stay in LA, the thing I had to do was to get a job. And soon I was offered a job. And actually it's the same job I have right now in the athletics department at LMU. So I started in January of '94, and this new adventure, began. And I really wasn't afraid of the work, or the challenge of being, a single mom. I was really determined to do it all. I was going to work full time. I was going to, give my kids the love and the attention and the support they needed, because it wasn't their fault, that they were without a dad. And I had heard that children, from a single parent family, were less likely to be well-adjusted, or less likely to be successful in life, or be not be happy. And that was the last thing in my mind that my kids were going to be. They were going to be everything that they should have been. So I really wanted them to, for me to give them the most I could, and for them to be the most successful. So I went to all their Little League games and took them to Cub Scouts and gave them birthday parties. And it was really very busy, incredibly busy, and incredibly stressful. And certainly my memory is very fuzzy for all the details. But I will never forget, how thoughtful and generous and kind my friends and my neighbors and my family were then, and they still are. One of my friends' husbands, offered to be the surrogate dad, who took my daughter to the YMCA father-daughter dance. And, friends took them for play dates and hiking and camping and McDonald's and Disneyland and so much more. They were incredible. But I think looking back, I was really naive or I don't know, extremely optimistic, to think that I could do it all as a single mom. I had no idea how lonely it was going to be for me personally, but I had this mission, to really make my children my priority. So that was my game plan, and I really needed to stick to it. But for me, I used running and training, for races to try to stay healthy, both physically and mentally. And that was really another key to my, maintaining my outlook, and my attitude. And certainly, in these past 28 years, since my husband died, there's been a lot of hiccups. We've had a lot of hiccups and a lot of derailments. But we've always managed to get back on track and, move forward, continue to put one foot in front of the other. I think, as hard as it was to raise these three children, I feel so incredibly grateful that I was able to live my life in such a meaningful way. I shared the excitements and the disappointments and the challenges, and I was really a part of that, as they were for me, and a part of my life and growing up as, still growing up as an adult. But, each of my children are college graduates. They're in loving relationships. They're working successfully, in careers that bring them joy. They are well-adjusted and nice humans. And I'm so very proud of the adults that they've become. And I know that they are proud of themselves. And finally, I know their dad would be very proud of them, and they'd be proud of me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know you might not have had a chance to look in the chat, but it is completely blowing up with just love and appreciation for you sharing your story with us. It's these stories of resilience that we get a chance to get to know you and each other better. And there's no doubt in my mind that these are incredibly well-adjusted children after hearing your incredible resilience. So thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your story. So our next speaker is a professor of psychology and the vice president for intercultural affairs. Please welcome Jennifer Abbe.
Thank you. Thank you, Mariah. So all the stories you've heard so far have been of tremendous strength, devotion, commitment. I'm going to share a story as a parent as well. But it has to do more with my letting go of expectations. So this is where it begins in 2013, when 4 of our 5 kids went with us to Argentina. Some of you may know that Doug, Christy, and I, our family, we went to Cordoba, Argentina for a couple years to establish a program there. I'm not going to talk about the program. This is the personal side of what it was to arrive in Cordoba in the middle of winter. So it was the end of June, and the kids had just finished their academic year of 2 sets of twins. The boys had just finished 3rd grade and the girls had just finished 11th grade. Or maybe 10th grade. So they finished school mid-June and we arrive at the end of June, and the Cordoba school was on winter break. So going to the Southern Hemisphere is a little bit discombobulating. Their school year runs from March to December. So not only do they not get a summer break, they just didn't get a summer. We were gonna start a summer and instead we arrived in the middle of winter. So this is a story of going to their school, which was a bilingual school. It's called Colegio Mark Twain in Argentina, yes. And most of the students were from Cordoba. And we chose it because it was very lively. It seemed like a perfect setting. You know, they had an international baccalaureate program. I thought, oh, the girls would love that. And then there was also an attached elementary school. They had uniforms. This was the first day of school. So I'm going to get out of the way so you can see. That was in our kitchen of the student house. That was a stray puppy that a couple of our community coordinators had decided to adopt from the street. And this, you know, we didn't even know where we were, and we had to take care of a puppy for a few months as well. And those were the kids in their uniforms. So I'm going to focus on the boys because this is really about what I learned in adjusting to life in Argentina and what I learned from the school there about what it means to be, like Tegan says, a success, but this is Argentine style. So Colegio Mark Twain, we met with the psychopedagogia staff. So this is psychopedagogy, which that's not a word here, but the boys from the 1st grade had individualized educational plans. So they were IEPs, they were special ed, they were pulled out of classes since 1st grade. And, you know, it's kind of like, I don't want to, you know, diminish any kind of profession, but I always feel guilty when I go to the dentist and the dental hygienist, and it's like I've never flossed or brushed good enough, you know, and then you always feel a little badly. Well, for me, the IEPs and the boys and their programs, it always felt a little bit like we never did quite enough in the summer. They were never quite where they ought to be. I'm not really a nervous parent at all. In fact, I might be a little bit too much on the other extreme. So, but I had been conditioned, you know, I had all their paperwork and I had brought everything with me to Argentina so that they wouldn't get too far behind. And so I'm going to the school staff with a stack of test results and, you know, psychological assessments and, okay, where do we begin? How do we do this? And their words to me were tranquila, which is like chill. And they said to me, and I'm going to try it in a little bit of Spanish, forgive me. Los niños necesitan tiempo para acomodarse en el colegio con clases, hacer amigos y acostumbrarse a una cultura, lenguaje, realidad social diferente. Okay, if you don't get all that I'm saying, I didn't get all that they were saying either, but I got enough to understand what they were telling me is, you know what? This is all well and good, But the most important thing is that the boys need time to adjust to a new culture. They need time to make friends. They need time to get used to a different social reality. So you need to just chill. I was taken aback, you know? And what did this mean? And how much time? I mean, was it like a couple of weeks, or how much time would they need to adjust? And I'm so used to the US sense of time that, you know, I didn't know what to expect. And they're saying, yeah, the first 6 months, just don't worry about their classes and everything. Well, I decided to go with it because what else could I do? I was in a different cultural reality. And so I trusted the the letting go. And partly it was necessity. I couldn't do anything else really. So the boys and the girls got used to their classes. For the boys and the girls, this meant kisses on the cheek from all their classmates every day. You know, how do you besos, right? You give the Argentine kiss. It's very physical. I mean, for teenage girls, it was really uncomfortable and awkward. You know, everyone trying to kiss you at that age is just really disturbing. For the boys, I mean, they're third grade, you know, it's like they didn't necessarily, you know, seek it out or want it, but whatever, they'll get used to it. And what they noticed about their school experience at Mark Twain is that, Mom, they have recess after every class. I mean, it's like 15 minutes after every class where they had everyone go out and play, and a lot of soccer, a lot of chatting in the hallway. It just was very relational. I'm thinking of Tegan, you know, thinking of school. So Argentine school was just the classes were bilingual. So, you know, some classes were in English, some classes were in Spanish. The girls had classes in French. That was the main language of instruction was Spanish, and they couldn't understand either the Spanish or the French. It was very confusing. So yes, everyone needed time to adjust. The boys had long days. They got picked up eventually by a transporte at 7:15 in the morning and got dropped off at 5 in the evening. So it was a long day for them, and a lot of hot meals. You know, they had milanesas and, you know, hot mashed potatoes and, you know, meat for lunches. It was hard. It was also very immersive. I mean, just the culture and the physicality and the relationality was really something. You know, there are things that I remember, birthday parties, you know, parents know birthday parties and, you know, buying gifts and everything. They don't care about the gifts so much. Like you buy Hot Wheels for a kid, that's fine as a gift. The thing is you want to play together. So everyone goes to every party. The focus is not on the gifts, but on the time together, the richness of that. The school shut down every time it was a World Cup time and Argentina was playing in the World Cup. Every time Argentina had a match, the whole school shut down. The school cafeteria staff made empanadas and ice cream so that they could watch the games too. They didn't even meet for classes. They just watched the game. And that's how they spent their time. That was valuable to share that time together. So what really struck us about living in Argentina, the adjustment of, well, you get invited to dinner and they say, oh, you know, can we pick you up maybe around, how does 10 p.m. sound? And it's like, that's what time you start. And then dinner is like at least 5 or 6 hours. I mean, you don't get home till 1 or 2 in the morning. And just as a you know, someone from the US very conscious of time, like the idea, can you imagine like a dinner invitation where you know it's like a minimum 5 hours and you're just hanging out and you're talking, and then there's the art of the asado where like you have different cuts of meat and they're put on a fire, which is, you know, it's not like dinner's prepared, it's like they make the fire and then there's the appetizers and then there's the morcilla and then there's an order. And it's a ritual, and it's a ritual that you can't rush, and you take time. You go to the store, to the bakery, to libreria. It's like everywhere you go, you have conversations with the people behind the counter, and you wait in line because things take longer because people are talking. It took time to adjust. And like the staff at Colegio Mark Twain encouraged us to just take the time. So I guess what I want to focus on as far as what I learned in this context is that it really challenged my concept of how we move through time in the United States, how we speak of time. Time is money. It costs time. How do you spend time? How do you use your time? How did you waste time? When you think of it in an Argentine context, it's really odd how we in the US have a relationship with time where that it's so instrumental and economical and efficient. And being in a culture where we were confronted with the richness of, and it was frustrating at times because time was a different experience of learning to be in relationship to other people. Well, we do that here, but where that's the most important thing. It's the most important thing is to be with your family. Sundays were sacred. To be with your friends, to spend time every week, friendships spanning many years where people get together for, meriendas, the evening kind of what we think of as dinner, but it's just their snack time, or the men get together on a weekly basis to play soccer and then have a barbecue, an asado after that. That was really something, and something I'm still absorbing coming back, and we've been back for over 5 years. What is our relationship to time? And what does that speak of what we value? People. How do we center what's most important to us in the way that we live our lives? It takes time to adjust. In a pandemic, letting go, the boys missed a year of school, they're behind. Like, what does that even mean? They adjusted fine. They're okay. And I didn't have to worry about them getting behind, losing time. And in the meantime, I learned a lot from our Argentine friends and from the richness of the culture, the richness of daily rhythms, rituals that centered on people, not time. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing me to that amazing world. I feel like when Jennifer speaks, I now have the permission to just be okay with a lot of things, to be enough. And that's exactly why we do this year after year, is to be transported like that. So thank you. So our final speaker tonight is a professor of animation with the School of Film and Television. Please welcome Jose Garcia Moreno.
Hello, everyone. Hola a todos y todas. First of all, I would like to thank my fellow speakers today for such an engaging afternoon. And with all this Zoom fatigue that we all have, it's just so enriching to actually hear people talking from the heart without the need of being efficient or, dealing with protocols in work. And it's just like a deep conversation. So it's not only going to be the story, our stories, right? The series of stories, but it's going to be the story of our stories as we are here present today among us. And so I would like to thank also the library for giving me the chance to actually dig into my deepest memories and claim part of my past through this idea of LMU Speaks, if only you knew, and if only you knew how I came to be who I am. So the little story, which I have entitled My Father the Pirate, is actually very close to me. And he said, close your eyes or you will not be able to see. That's what my father used to say to me. And it was really weird because we were in the middle of this power outage, which were actually very common occurrences around 7 or 8 at night, probably around this time of the day, exactly right now, growing up in Mexico City in the 60s. And it was funny because I always wondered then as a kid, why he would ask me to close my eyes if everything was pitch dark and uncommonly quiet. If you have ever been to Mexico City, uncommonly quiet in this busy and noisy and cacophonic city during those outages, and everything, when the lights went off, it was like if the volume turned down into the city. It was like a really special moment. Later in life, it struck me very clearly that I had the privilege of growing up with someone whose greatest gift, my father, was his ability to create exquisite visions and images only through his voice. Such a fantastic storyteller. He was that kind of person who will take over and capture the attention of every listener present, being on a party or at a dinner party or at a dinner table, all with the magic of his speech, unraveling stories from the past or the present or even the future. And he was able to bring you up to exhilaration, and a moment later, he'll bring you down with deep sorrow. And suddenly he questioned you with poignant sarcasm, which was one of his amazing qualities that actually reveal what a deep mind he had. And then he circled his stories to this round fruition with details of character and personality from all this series of protagonists of his stories. Real or not, he will create these magnificent stories. And his geniality, in fact, was that he was never written or recorded, but his power of improvisation was unparalleled. And his words, the way that I remember his words, his brilliant stories, his sense of tempo and narrative lasted only for a moment, only in that frugality of the present time. It was this live performance only for the profit of those fortunate of being in the presence of his performance, in the presence of his karma, in the presence of his aura. It's not an art. His was not an art that was going to be archived or preserved for next generations, but it was perennial, and it was fugitive, and it was incandescent. Like those mandalas, remember those mandalas, those Tibetan mandalas that are worked with the delicacy and precision, and then they are being erased and vanished in the moment, the frugality of life. And for many years, believe me, for many, many years, I deeply regret that I never recorded him, not only once, not a single time. And I did go myself, I did go on to have this, I will say, notorious career producing 3 of the most successful radio stations in Mexico City, which meant that recording him in a studio wouldn't be like something impossible to do. It could have been quite easy for me to do. But now, years later, as I think about it, when I was actually asked to talk to you about something that actually defines me, I think that probably it might have been better that I never recorded him, because the way that I remember it, it was poetic, and it was rebellious, and it was unique, but it also was ferociously transitory. There was no fame, no glory, no Hollywood, but it was beautiful and powerful in its own anonymity. It would have been like really hard, now that I think about his character, to bring out of my father, of his comfort, and to bring him into this recording studio, and to make him pretend to be the same person, that same person that is so brilliant in a dinner table, to actually make him be that same person in front of a microphone and then perform. He would have needed, I think, to pretend at first. And then if ever he became comfortable with the mic, he would have needed to actually stop pretending and stop acting to become once again himself, which is exactly what all great actors actually said about acting, that acting really starts when you stop acting. But none of it ever happened because his brilliant performances were meant to enrich the way that I see it now. They meant to enrich life itself in a fugitive moment, for a few moments, for a few of us who had the privilege to actually witness him in action. He never thought of his talent as a talent, nor he wished to profit from it. He was an engineer, and he had this practical mind. And his stories were, how can you call them? They were his divertimento, his way of creating alternative worlds within the fugitive present, allowing him in his unique way to take control of the mind of an audience for a few moments. What I am certain is that I owe my father two things. One is my love for radio broadcasting, to which I devoted a great part of my creative life, as a sort of an homage to his talents, if you ask me, and how he showed me the power of the spoken word as a creator of images. And the second, my love for reading, which came at a very early age, and which I can assure you was undoubtedly triggered by my fascination towards his live performed stories. So imagine yourself as the lights went off in those Mexico City night power outages, everything silent. My father became a pirate or a corsair or a privateer or a buccaneer or an adventurer. And I learned how to differentiate all those misfits and outcasts and adventurers from the stories he told me from the books of an Italian author by the name of Emilio Salgari. And Emilio Salgari, and I said that, the name of that author to you, and probably some of you might not recognize the name. And I have always wondered why Salgari never became well known in this country, here in the United States. Because Salgari was the quintessential read for younger readers such as myself in so many countries. He was a father of adventure fiction for many of us. Borges and Garcia Marquez and Umberto Eco read everything about Salgari and wrote extensively about Salgari. Che Guevara loved Salgari. And one of his friends, one of Che Guevara's friends, Taivo, actually wrote that anti-imperialism was Salgarian in origin. Sergio Leone, who created the spaghetti Western genre, he was inspired in Salgari's characters. So Salgari wrote all of these adventures. And what is really very interesting about Salgari is that all of Salgari's protagonists came from all over the world. They were as diverse as the world itself. You could find in Salgari's stories bronze-skinned pirates in love with rare-haired princesses, like you're seeing behind me. This is one of the covers of Salgari's books, The Tigers of Montparnasse. And not all protagonists were men. You can find, for example, relentless female characters like Yolanda, the daughter of the Black Corsair. Sandokan was written by Emilio Salgari. And that was the first book I ever read from beginning to end. No pictures, right? No comic books, except for those marvelous cover arts like the one that I actually even pointing out behind you, that circulated with Salgari's book series and were beautiful to collect. In a way, now that I think about it, Sandokan was the first book I ever read, but in fact, I knew already that story by heart because my father had narrated for me during those power outages. I still remember it really very clearly. Or do I remember it very clearly? Have I recreated that story in my own mind and I'm retelling it again to myself so that it may fit a preconceived idea of my own father? Is it a real memory, or is it a vision I have reconstructed? How certain are my memories? How certain is a memory? I guess it really doesn't matter, because what it matters is that now, in this precise moment, as I am telling it to you in this present time, this story is for real. And the lights were off. And my parent will say to me, Sandokan and the pirates heard the bells of the church, and they knew that it was 7 o'clock at night. And the bells rang 7 times. And at that precise moment, when I heard my father say that, I heard the bells of the church, which was 2 blocks away from my parents' house in Mexico City. And I count them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. As I see it now, I am certain, I'm absolutely certain that great storytellers conjure the universe. They become one in time and in celestial rhythm. The bells were ringing at unison, not only in his pirate story, but also in the reality of that present moment which I was part of, in my own neighborhood, within the darkness of the city's power outage. And then he went on. Sandokan knew it was 7 o'clock. The night has come, and they could find their way out of the sewage where they have remained hidden, away from the soldiers of the Comendador. Sandokan, the pirate, and his men were then able to escape from the lands of the law. And I was in awe. I was fascinated. And then the ultimate trick of his magic was displayed. At that exact moment, after he had finished his story, the lights came back on. And then he looked at me and smiled, as when someone will grin after they have shared a deep secret. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I were to only use one word of of how I'm feeling, it's a single word that you said, and not just the word, but how you said it: incandescent. I'm going to sit in the glow of that word for a long time, and I think everyone else here will too. I want to thank you and all of our speakers here. If everyone would please turn their video on, just so that the audience can kind of see you and thank you all with me. I want to also say a special thanks to the Dean of the Library, Christine Brancolini, Paige Peterson, who created the graphics for this year's event, and of course, the Assistant Dean of Ethnic and Intercultural Services, Henry Ward. Without fail, every year, Henry introduces us to the most amazing students. We have 2 very good examples right here who remind us all of why we're here. So on behalf of Rhonda Rosen, Carol Raby, John Jackson, Raimundo Andrade, and myself, thank you for being a part of this wonderful evening. As you leave, there's going to be very quick, 2 short question survey as you leave the event. If you would just take a moment, give us your feedback. I mean, these are librarians. They read absolutely everything, so it will be read. So please do that. We would appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your night. We'll see you next year. Good night, everyone, and thank you.